Hey everyone, this is Professor Chandler. Welcome to our explorations in literary genres where we're going to be focusing on gender. I'm really excited to teach this class because we're going to examine some really cool ways of using theory to read literature. And one of the first things that we're going to do is we're going to start playing around with definitions and finding out how things can either fit into them or start deviating away from them. I like to look at literature the same way I might pick up a crystal and turn it around in my hands. If I hold it up, I can flip it and let the light catch the different faces, and I'm going to see blues and greens and violets and pinks. And each different side of that prism is going to be one way of looking at the overall text. Literary criticism is a lot like this because we're just going to hold the crystal up and we're going to pause it for a second and we're going to see how can we read this particular theory or this type of idea into this text from this one angle. So I know when we're holding this crystal, we can see there's so many different ways to see this text, so many different ways to read it. We can read this through, history or through psychology. But right now, what I want us to do and what we're going to be focusing on is gender. How can we read this text through gender? What is it saying about gender? Now you're going to see that, like all good theories, they are really great tools to be able to ground our arguments as we're starting to construct them. But really smart ideas are able to both find ways that a text can fit into this theory and ways that it can start deviating away from this theory. Now, I love fine lines. I love to see how subjects can fit into categories and where they begin to deviate from those definitions. So we're going to explore multiple different types of definitions in here and different theories. And I'm hoping that you begin to develop the skills to see how these theories work for our texts and where they begin to fail. And one thing I've learned about theories is they all begin to disintegrate at some point. So finding that fine line is something that I'm always interested in. Now, this class is really just going to focus on gender and literature, and we have such a short amount of time to do this, so we're going to be doing a lot of heavy reading. Now, I kept our required text down to a collection of short stories from Sandra Cisneros and a spine text called The Theory Toolbox. Now, I like the Theory Toolbox because it's going to kind of take us through several different types of literary theories that we can use. Now, these theories you can also find in sociology and psychology, many other things, but this will kind of just lay a foundation for you. So if you've been sitting in classes and they're discussing things like Foucault, you're going to be able to have a little bit of a better understanding of who that might be and maybe how that type of lens can affect your reading. So we are going to take some of these other different types of text that I'm going to integrate through. Now, the two you should have based on our syllabus, and the other ones I'm going to be linking in each one of our weekly modules. Now, I really like to push the boundaries of what is considered literature in the first place. For me, I look at literature as something that could be read in more than one way. And so this might include art, it might include film, and it might include music. So you're going to see that I'm going to be weaving in several different examples beyond both of these two texts, and those are going to be linked in our weekly modules, kind of surrounding some ideas that we have in the chapters that we're going to be reading, and some questions that might be used as we're surrounding this conversation of gender and literature. Now, one of the first things I want us to consider beyond what is literature is really what is gendered. And from here, we're going to look at a pretty big question, and that is, what is women's literature? Is this literature that's written by women or for women or about women? And we'll also look at, what is feminism? What is feminist theory? What's the difference between these two? One of the things that I want to kind of emphasize here is that we're going to be approaching this topic as scholars, which means that, we're going to take this theory and we're going to measure up these texts and we're going to see where they align or where they deviate from the theories and the definitions that we're working with. So it's not really so much about our own personal opinions so much, but really how we can manipulate these texts to see where it might work or where it might fall apart. I'm really interested in those fine lines. Now, where you're coming from with your own personal reflection and how that's being played with is something that we are going to be exploring also. I don't expect us all to agree, and maybe there might be times or instances where, your understanding of something might even shift or change, but that's not the overall goal for me here. My overall goal is really just to give you some experience working with a particular type of theory more in depth. Because once you can do this here with gender, you can really do this with a historical lens, or you can do this with a psychoanalytical lens or a Marxist lens or whatever lens that you're given and told to read a text through. So we're really going to kind of practice around with this. So each week, I'm going to have us focus on a chapter in the theory toolbox as our main spine. And from there, I have all different types of readings for us. We are going to listen to Beyonce's Lemonade. We're going to look at some essays that are written by, feminist scholars that may not think that Lemonade is really quite a feminist text. We are going to look at some, really good questions over the course about what exactly is gendered. And who influences it, who benefits from it, and who doesn't benefit from that. And we're going to use film and music and art and short stories and poetry and essays and all kinds of things in order to put together these kinds of questions. So each week, I'm going to have you do just a weekly written response. And these are going to be between 400 and 600 words. They probably will be a little bit more informal. It's okay if you're using your first person response here. But I do want us to also remember this is an English class, so we are going to make sure that, we are writing academically for the most part. I'm interested in seeing how well you can back up your claims with textual evidence from the sources that we're using. And whatever questions that you might have. So now this, as we see in the news pretty much everywhere around us, can be a pretty hot topic. So I'm hoping here that, since we are all scholars and we're looking at this academically, we can approach this with kindness and an open mind, and to see, where the theory is and how it's being applied and where things are fitting or deviating from. So if we can kind of remove, ourselves a little bit from this, and to look at it as that lens, that crystal that we're holding up in our hands. That's the part that I'm really interested in. Where's the fine line? Where do we get when we start flipping that crystal in our hands and the colors start to change? That's something I'm hoping that you can explore with me. So to give you an example, I have here just a few images. We have Joan of Arc portrayed in a couple of different ways here. This could be looked at historically, it could be looked at religiously, but for this particular class, I would want to look at it through gender. How is Joan's gender being reflected here or presented? We have two striking different examples here. One is definitely focusing on her femininity, maybe her innocence. Another is focusing on her as a warrior. This is interesting. This is, one way that we could be reading into it. How is this character being portrayed to us, and what are they doing with their gender, and what does that mean? So these are some examples that I might have as I'm moving forward. Now, I do want to make sure that I am kind of laying out a little bit of a distinction here between feminism and feminist theory. Now, feminism is really hard to define. If I put everybody in the room and I asked you to define feminism, I'm probably going to get a different response from everybody in there. We have 4 different waves of feminism that are happening, and I do go over this in our lecture notes, so please be sure to check those out. But at its core, it's going to be advocating for the equality of women. Don't confuse this with, women want to be above men. That's misandry. That's not feminism. We're not going to be talking about that too much right here. But our class, our focus, will be using feminist theory as one of the theories that we're going to be looking at. And I think this is much easier to define. So a feminist theory is seeking to understand or interpret the text from this particular point of view. We're going to see how is gender constructed, how are the characters explored. We're going to examine language, women's voices, all these kinds of things. These are considered more as a feminist study. Now, feminist studies has definitely grown and expanded over the last, 20 to 30 years. And under this, umbrella, we start looking less at just, how women are constructed, but more so how gender is constructed. This is where you're hearing terms like toxic masculinity or masculinity studies or queer theory. We're really looking at, gender as a whole. And that's where I'm hoping to go with this class. I want to look at all the representations. Now, when you're doing your reflections or your analysis, it's perfectly fine for you to focus on one particular gender that you might be interested in and exploring further. Each of our characters is bringing something in. Where you decide to align that up with your theory is up to you. I'm open to how you plan on interpreting these different texts. So if you are interested in masculinity studies or queer theory or feminist theory, I'm open to it. I'm excited to see what you're learning and how you're seeing these texts and where they fit with the theories and where they begin to disintegrate. So if we're looking at art here, obviously this is Frida Kahlo's The Wounded Deer. We could look at this particular, image through so many different lenses. But if I'm looking at it through gender, one of the things that I'm going to notice off the bat here is that I have this self-portrait of Frida Kahlo. And it is on a masculine deer. And I might ask some questions about that. Why is this, why are we playing with gender here, and what does that mean? So, obviously you can read this through other different types of lenses also and look at the suffering, and you can look at the nature, and you can, see other things that are happening here. It's not the only way to read a text, but we are going to be focusing in and developing those skills of this one particular theory, hopefully in a much richer and deeper way. Now, I don't know about you guys. I happen to be a bit more of a fan of Marvel than I am DC, but I do notice these things as I go out. How are we using gender to advertise? And we can see here Batman versus Wonder Woman. Both are emphasizing the bodies here, but one is definitely at the forefront. And I'm also interested in the language that's being used here. So we can have welcome to a world without rules here with Batman, or power, grace, wisdom, and wonder. If we flipped the words here, the language here, I think we would get some interesting constructions of gender. But visually here we have quite a bit to work with also. So these are just some of the ways that we might be looking here at gender. The images, the words that are here. And as we start diving into our text, we're going to see that, society plays a role and history plays a role, and all these things kind of come together. And I'm really excited about our conversations that we're going to have. You're going to see that I am on the discussion boards with you guys. I like to engage with your ideas and to ask you questions. So don't feel like you just have to respond and then go away. I'm going to come back with you. I want to have a conversation about this. I find all of this fascinating. I'm excited to see how you are reading gender this semester. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me. I am available for Zoom meetings or to chat on the phone or via email. So just reach out. I hope you guys have a really great first week and enjoy this class. And just, be sure to check out the modules. I have everything listed right there. Everything is linked into the modules. So you're going to see week 1. That's where we're going to want to begin. If you have any questions, reach out. Have a great one.